I'm going to hand it off to Mike Cataldo. Mike is talking about making testing fun again with Cypress. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike MC Cataldo, and he'll tell you more about himself. Go ahead, Mike. I'll stop sharing.
All right, thanks everybody. Let me see if I can make myself spotlight here. All right, if there's any issues with audio, video, or anything like that, let me know. I'll try to keep an eye on chat and things like that. Feel free to, interrupt if you want to, but there'll be time at the end for questions. Justin, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving me a heads up towards the end. Sometimes I run a little, but yeah. So I'm Mike Cataldo, and I'm talking about Cypress. I'm wearing my Cypress shirt today. I'm kind of a fanatic, and you'll see why in a little bit. So let's see. There we go. So I actually just barely today got hired by Cypress. They actually approached me and were impressed with my experience and fanaticism. It's insanity, really, but that tickled their fancy, and they asked me to join their team. Kind of gave me an offer I couldn't turn down, and I'm really excited. It's happening. So I'll be focusing on developer experience, which is essentially serving the community, working on projects that are going to make using Cypress the best experience and for you guys to be successful with it. I'm really active in the JavaScript community. Justin invited me to this community. It's funny. This really hasn't. It didn't occur to me until I met Justin that you can actually join other communities in other cities, on Meetup, especially even though you're not there, because now they're all virtual. So that was, obviously before, I was reluctant to do that. What's the point if I can't actually be there? But I'm in Utah, and glad to be a member of this meetup and to present to you guys. And I'm on Slack and everything else. You can reach out to me there. But so yeah, I'm active in the JS community and kind of going worldwide and teaching workshops. So like basically twice a year, I host a workshop, Cypress. It's kind of on a weekly basis for 8 to 10 weeks, like once a week. And it's really enjoyable. And for me, I hope for the people that attend too, but yeah. And then obviously I'm going to conferences when I can, virtual conference. The latest Test JS one was pretty cool. The Test JS Summit, and hope I can go to more. And I also recently started iheartjs. I have a newsletter. I have some written content that I put up there, pages for that accompany my workshop, and then also I have a YouTube channel for all the live streams that I do through with the workshop, and there'll be more to come. So kind of the agenda is basically I'll kind of do sort of an overview of really quick overview of testing and kind of the objectives, so that we're kind of all on the same page and on the same kind of frame of mind. And we'll talk about kind of why testing sucks for a lot of us, and what we can do to make testing, writing tests fun again, and that's obviously through Cypress. But yeah, so why do we test? Really, if we think about it, for a moment, I think it's we might say like, well, I'm told to, and because I'm supposed to, and of course I want to avoid bugs, and you know, and especially if we're writing automation, it's, you know, I want to save, you know, I want to save people from having to manually test, and, you know, those are all good and everything. And I just did something weird with the, there we go. But, you know, really, like, it's in my job description. I'm trying to avoid bugs. I'm trying to protect the code base. But how can we kind of sum that up? And I don't have too much time for a story, but basically in one of the organizations I was with, we had basically like component and unit tests that I was working on, and they wanted me to do some end-to-end tests, and I was really reluctant, invested, and I debated it for days. This was before I was actually using Cypress. Um, and and really, like, what ultimately came down to it, even though we had a good amount of unit and integration and component tests, is essentially comes down to one word, and that's confidence. So the reason why we write tests is so that we have confidence, so that we know that what we're shipping to users is actually going to work the way that we think it's going to work, the way that we expect, that users expect it's going to work. Confidence that we're not going to, you know, introduce regression with changes, right? So what are the types of tests? I kind of talked a little bit about it, like unit and component. That's the smallest bit. That's, you know, the one that I think we many times those tests are so simple and they don't seem to always provide too much confidence, but you know, you do something stupid when, you know, when you're, you know, if you do something stupid, your unit tests are gonna fail. That's usually the first thing, and they'll fail quickly, right? And then integration tests, they are, you know, a little bit bigger. Sometimes integration, unit, component, sometimes they kind of all get called the same thing. But nonetheless, you know, you're testing multiple units that work together, making sure they all work together. And at this point, just like with unit, we're still mocking a lot of things as much as we can. They're also still pretty fast. And then you have end-to-end, right? That's kind of the whole thing, the whole application, end to end, the back end, the front end, just like a user would use it. So just like a user would use your application in production, just like a manual tester might, or a you know, product owner would test out a feature, test a change. It's essentially what an end-to-end test is automating, but it's also the most expensive, right? It's usually the least reliable of the bunch. It's probably the most frustrating. It's why, you know, I kind of fought it and didn't really want to, you know, was really reluctant to take that on at one point. But you know, the end-to-end tests are a way to really provide confidence that everything from your front end to your back end is working the way that you intend, right? So for example, if you have a back end team or an and a front end team, sometimes there's a mismatch in that contract, right? So you might be mocking your API, but then when you hook it up to a real back end, something fails, right? And that's not something that you can get from a unit or an integration test. And users don't care if a unit or integration test passed before you released it to them and they found a problem, right? So end-to-end tests are obviously very important. And then lastly, we have static analysis. So for those that might not know, static analysis is like what you would get from ESLint or TypeScript, where it's actually looking at your code and checking things out. And that is still part of testing, I think. It's definitely a component to quality, because it's sort of like an automated code review. It's making sure that you didn't make any dumb mistakes. It's making sure that, your style is the way that it should. Whether or not it's important to you, it keeps things consistent. And it's just one less thing that you have to worry about when it comes to code review, whether it's on the receiving or giving end. So next, so I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this slide just because I see this sort of pyramid all the time and it gets old, but it also really illustrates the point, which is that, as you get to, get out of the way here a little bit, but, as you get from UI down to, integration, service, whatever, and unit tests, the speed usually goes up and the cost goes down. But as we talked about as I said, with the end-to-end, you also have a lot more confidence in those end-to-end tests. So while you might have fewer, they're still really important. So that doesn't diminish their importance. But you also have to understand that they're up there at the top for a reason, and it's because they are super expensive. So we can get that confidence if we can kind of minimize the slowness aspect and the cost that's involved in getting those end-to-end tests. Whoops. So this is another better illustration. Some people might think it's better. I think it's pretty good. It's by Kent C. Dodds, and there's a little plug there for testingjavascript.com. Kent C. Dodds is cool, and in my book, and he's got a great course. And also he has a post that kind of talks about this, but he also includes static analysis in there. And it just goes to show that there's different ways of looking at it. And just because somebody says, the test pyramid is the standard, it's not necessarily the best choice. Here's another one. I stole this right from Gleb's one of Gleb's slides. Gleb is an engineer at Cypress, and basically what this is illustrating is that as you get through the cycle, from the time that you're planning and developing the product or a change, it gets more and more expensive to fix bugs as well as to write tests, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because that can kind of tie into why it kind of sucks to do it later too. So with that, so what makes writing tests stink? Why is it sometimes a miserable experience for a lot of us? Now, let's be honest, like it's a necessary evil, right? It's not something that we all want to do. It's like, especially when you're really pressed for time, you really are pressured into getting features out the door, tests kind of get put to the wayside, especially frustrating tests that are hard to write, tests that are, like you don't even really know what you're supposed to be testing. There's no directive there. That can really make it a hassle. But what are some other things, like having to learn and use another framework or library? The context switching, that's a big one for me anyway. Like having to switch to a different language other than JavaScript, like having to learn Java or Python or something else, or even having to use it. But even if I am great at it, having to switch from one thing to the other, from one language to another, is kind of a hassle. It doesn't have to be that way. And also it's context switching, especially if you're writing those tests much later. In other words, you developed this feature or change a week ago, and now you're writing tests for it. So you're way out of the context. You might not even remember what you did, and now you're writing tests for it. So there's that. And you're also playing, I know that, playing whack-a-mole, like retrying Flaky Test, that's a huge pain. and the process of writing and having to debug tests, waiting for them to finish, end-to-end tests are slow. So that's, especially if it's part of your CI/CD, right? So now you're having to push up a change and tests are running, and you're having to wait. So it's like, what am I going to do while I'm waiting for these tests to run and I'm retrying them? You're kind of wasting time there. You can't continue on until the test pass, right? So it just kind of feels like a waste of time, right? It's like, I'm putting in all this time. Why am I bothering to do this if nobody even trusts in the tests, or, if there's really no value, or if I'm putting so much time but not getting enough value back? And so now that, it's just sucks big time, right? So how do we make writing tests fun again? That's the big question. What kinds of things can we do to improve that? And it's not just with Cypress, a little bit of it has to do with the culture, right? And your attitude towards it, but having a tool that makes things easier is definitely a step in the right direction. Now, I say fun, right? And I'm sure you're thinking like, okay, this guy's like, he's trying to get me to join his cult or MLM or something like that, right? But like, I think of it this way. So, driving, especially if you're in traffic, and now we're working remotely, so we're not really in traffic, but if you're driving in traffic, like, driving is not fun, right? Like, you might say driving in general just sucks, right? Especially if you're in traffic a lot. But if you ever went to, like, I don't know if you guys have like K1 racing or those like indoor, like professional go-kart tracks, those are fun. Those are fun. You're going fast, you're whipping around, and you're drifting, and it's fun. And if you have never experienced that, I definitely recommend it. But if you don't think driving's fun, try that. Then you'll think driving's fun, because going fast and doing it in a way like not having to worry about getting a speeding ticket makes it all that much better. And it's that's fun to me. So anyway, so like, what are some things that we might think are, we might wish when we're writing tests, right? So we might say, well, if the API was actually, familiar, easy to use, so having it be in JavaScript would be nice. Having some good documentation, going on Stack and looking up, looking up problems. It'd be nice if like there was some up-to-date stuff and it wasn't from 8 years ago and doesn't apply. And maybe there was some documentation and canonical docs, but also, some support from the community. And it'd be nice if, like, you can actually write them in an easy way without having to really fight against it. And actually be in the context of the changes that you're trying to implement. And then actually, writing reliable tests, if that's realistic, that would be nice too, right? So now enter Cypress, right? What is it? It has a clean and intuitive API. It has built-in assertions so that you don't have to worry too much about it failing, because it kind of does those things that maybe should be obvious, like before you click on something, make sure it's actually visible, to the user. And if something isn't ready, let's make sure that it is ready first. If it fails, let's try getting that element or clicking on that element until it actually works, up to a certain point, right? And there's a lot of other magic that kind of happens as well. And it's because it's architected in a different way than other testing tools to make things a little bit easier. And then there's a visual test runner, and I'll show you that in a bit. And that's just for better workflow. The Cypress was designed to work at the time that you're actually making the changes, you're writing the tests at the same time. So, so while SDETs and QA engineers can use this product, developers can use it too to write end-to-end tests. And when I'm talking tests, by the way, if you haven't picked up on it, like I'm talking about front-end tests. You can do API tests with Cypress, but I'm mainly talking about front-end tests. And then you also have a dashboard, which is really cool. It shows like all of the tests and the history and things like that. But it also kind of shows you like which tests are flaky or slow, and that way you can put attention towards those tests to kind of keep things running smoothly. So Clean Intuitive API, it's awesome, and it's really easy to read. It's really obvious. If you've ever used, or rather Intuitive, like if you've ever used like WebDriver IO or Nightwatch, if you ever use jQuery, this is going to be super familiar to you. Yeah, and it reads like a real user, which is really nice too, because if you've ever had a situation where you go into a test, you're looking at a spec, you're like, what the heck is this thing doing? I have no idea what this test is doing. And you actually have to read it like you're studying like a law degree to actually understand what that test is doing. It's not really necessary, or it shouldn't be required. And it's like, you have a lot of other things to do. You shouldn't be spending your time trying to decipher what the test is doing. So when you have a really readable API, and it's nice and chainable, it just makes it that much easier to kind of reason about. And Cypress works with real JavaScript, so there's nothing really fancy about it. It uses Mocha and Chai syntax, which is common in other frameworks. And I mentioned jQuery. It kind of works really well with jQuery. If you know how to use promises, thenables, it's going to be really simple in that way as well. So yeah, it's easy in that way. It works with Intellisense, which is really cool. It's not a small API by any means. So having the Intellisense is kind of nice because it's not possible for anybody to really, like memorize everything. So having that in there is nice. And then also you have the method signatures. So their stuff's written in with TypeScript definitions. I don't know about you, but like I like to actually look at TypeScript definitions sometimes, and especially in Cypress. But with the method signatures, if you're using VS Code, at least I know for sure with VS Code, like it's going to show you all these details. It's going to give you a little example, and it's going to give you details about the syntax, and that's super helpful. But there's also a link that goes to the documentation too, so you can get even more details there. You're in the browser context, by the way, I forgot to mention that. So anything that you can do with your application in DevTools, you can do with Cypress. So it uses, plain JavaScript, modern, like, ES6 plus JavaScript, because it does, transpile it. I think it's Webpack, I think, yeah, preprocessor. So you can do, import, export, and all that, arrow function, so forth, and use plain JavaScript, and you have access to window. You have access to everything that is that's accessible in the browser. Like if you were to go to DevTools. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you can use, like, if you can debug your application or change state, like I know that's possible with, Angular and Vue and even React, where you can actually, manipulate the state of your application. You can do that here as well and be able to kind of take shortcuts, right? So if you don't need to go through the UI, let's just say you're just setting up state, you can do that with Cypress because it just uses plain JavaScript in the browser. That's huge. Cypress commands. So commands are in a queue. So they're queued up, and Cypress will essentially, like, what it does is it queues it up so that everything runs sequentially, but it also works with, so it's async in a way, but it also is, but it also does synchronous. So it reads synchronously, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But because it's kind of queued up, you can do things like test retrying, or rather command retry. So what happens is, like let's just say that you visit a page and you get this element and you click on it and the page is supposed to change. So you make an assertion on the URL. Well, the page is loading. So when it makes that assertion the first time, most likely the URL is not going to be, not going to be change, or maybe it's in the process of changing. So it's not just going to fail on the first time, on the first try. If you make an assertion with that dot should, and it fails the first time, it will continue to retry up to a certain point. You can set a timeout, and it gives you sort of that buffer so that you don't have to worry about, okay, when I do this, is my application going to be ready, and is it going to fail at that time? So you don't have to do any kind of like set timeout or anything like that with any funny business like that with your tests to get everything to be timed exactly right. And for any of you that have written tests before, you kind of know what I'm talking about, right? You write a test, tests don't execute in the same speed, at the same speed as a user would. It goes really fast. And so things just aren't always ready when you think they will. And so that leads to failure. Cypress is a specialized tool that does one thing really well: end-to-end testing web applications while they're under development. I mentioned this before. So, getting testing done when you're in the context of your changes, right? Getting testing done at that time is easier. You're in the right context. It's less expensive. And not only is it end to end, but it also is possible to write component and even API tests with Cypress as well. So this is pretty cool. This visual test runner. This is one of the things that does that specifically with your workflow. It helps make that workflow really smooth because you're able to essentially write your spec, run it, see it running, and if there's a failure, you can see that. You can also step through your test command or line by line. Okay. So for each one of these commands that's in here, on the right side is actually a DOM snapshot of your application. So as you can see here, we're hovering over these, and when you hover over a command, it shows the DOM snapshot. It also shows, if you're interacting with the DOM, it shows the particular thing that you're interacting with. So so you know exactly even where it's clicking. There's a little kind of red dot that indicates where on the element it's clicking, if it's a click, or it highlights the element that you might be typing into or reading from. Yeah, and you can stop, you can retry your test, you can even change the viewport size, all from here. It tells you your runtime, which tests pass, and so forth. On the left side, this is called the command log, and on the right is your app preview, your application. There's also a little tool here called the selector playground, and that enables you to actually kind of search and test out your selectors. And if you know how kind of frustrating that is, how helpful that can be. And actually, there's a little button that even gives you the command. So once you find it and you have the right selector, you can just click a button and it actually copies the code, and then you just paste it into your spec where you need it. Debugging is really easy with it as well. So each one of those commands, when you hover, you see a DOM snapshot. When you click on it, it actually freezes that DOM snapshot so you can look and actually inspect at that point in time in DevTools. You can inspect the DOM just like you would your live application, but it also shows some information about the particular command that ran and maybe some other like details like what element it was applied to, and like in this case, what was actually typed in. And then also there is a debug command, and what that does is that actually spits out debug information from that point in time. And if you have DevTools already open, it'll actually pause. It'll stop right then and there. So if you've ever used the debugger statement in a script before and see it, pause in the browser, it's kind of a similar thing there. But you also have some helpful details. So to kind of illustrate how Cypress deals with errors, we'll look at a test where sci.contains users means an element that contains the text users. And we're going to click on that, but it's out of view. So this is the error that you get. So you've got this first one here is the type of error that it is. And then you have the error message. And it's telling us here that we failed to click because the element isn't visible. So you can see this contains actually is not, the part where it's looking for the element didn't fail. It's the click that actually failed. And it's because the element is in the DOM, it's just not visible. And Cypress doesn't click on something unless it actually is visible on the page, because a user's not going to click an element that's not visible. So why should Cypress, right? And there is a little fix this problem or use force true. So you can force that if you want to, but by default, Cypress is going to fail it. And it also tells us what the element is. In this case, it's an li with the user's text. It's telling us why. It's telling us that it has the CSS property. And then it also gives us, number 4 here, it gives us the spec that where it failed, the line and the character, right? But what's cool is that this blue text here, when you click on it, actually opens up VS Code at the line, or whatever your IDE is, you can set it up. It opens it at the line and the character where it is. So you just click on it and you can go right to the place where the problem happened. In this case, line 6 right here. It goes right to that spot where the failure is so that you can look at it and fix it. And then it gives you the stack trace as well. You could print the details to the console. It's awesome. Super helpful errors, unlike, in other experiences. With this, you can click on learn more and get more details about the error and some tips on how to fix it. So it's really helpful, and it's just one of the ways that kind of makes the process easier, because dealing with errors is just part of the process. The dashboard, actually, let me go back a second. So something I forgot to illustrate as well is, at least in the past, before I was using Cypress, a lot of times what I would do is when I would run a test, I'd run it in like not a headless browser, a headed browser, I guess, so that I could actually see what the test was doing. And then if it happened to fail, what I would do is, let's just say it's like 6 lines, and the 3rd line is where it failed, right? I would comment out that code that failed, and then I would run it again and see if it see if it worked up to that point. And then I might add another step or uncomment a line and then run it again and continue to do that until I figured out exactly where the problem was. And when I saw where it failed and where it passed, I would kind of compare, the two. I would have one browser open and another browser open and do all this like gymnastics to try to figure out where the heck the problem is and why the timing just isn't right. And that's an annoying experience and something that went away for me when I started using Cypress. Okay, so the dashboard. Justin, how are we doing on time? I didn't really, I'm bad with time.
How much
Still
more
with
do you
me?
need?
Say again?
How much more time do you need?
Maybe 10 more minutes?
That works for me.
Okay, great. Like I said, I'm bad with time, but I'll try. I'll try to get close to that. So with a dashboard, you can see all of your runs locally, CI, wherever. This is super helpful. I know sometimes with like when you're writing tests, you don't know what tests failed when and what changes were involved when that test failed. This gives you a lot more insight into that. It also allows you to kind of see the tests that are running on other devs' machines, on CI, against different branches, against master or whatever, main branch. It allows you to see all of that. And then there's details inside in the runs. Over here, you can see we ran in the master branch, Sean, with this commit. If I click on this, it actually takes me, if I set up my integration with GitLab or GitHub, it'll actually take me to there and show me that commit, which is cool. And some timing information, as well as like, did it run in CI? Did it run locally? What was the machine that it ran on? What was the browser and the version of Cypress that was used? And then down here, this little bar that's here is showing me essentially the whole test, and it looks like it took 41 seconds. And out of that, this kind of long test failed at the beginning. Then I have a lot of other, sort of shorter tests. And if I have a long list of these, this bar kind of gives me an idea of how this test compares with regards to length, to other tests. It also allows you to, so Cypress will actually take a screenshot when the test fails, and it sends that to the dashboard. So you can see a screenshot, but you can also watch a video. If this looks familiar, it's because this is the test runner. So it shows you the test runner. This is cool because you can actually, like, if a test fails, you can go to it in the dashboard, go to the specific test, click on the play button, and it'll actually play it right through as if you ran it locally and watched it run inside the runner. And then it shows you the errors as well. So with all the same details. And then here you've got a little screenshot, and then you can watch the recording. And then there's also a button that shows you the raw log. So just like if you were to run it headless, it shows you that sort of reporter information. Integrations. So it integrates, I mentioned before, with GitHub and GitLab. GitLab is a relatively new one. I had the pleasure of trying out the GitLab integration before it went live, and it's awesome. I mean, it was flawless right from the get-go. Okay, there were like a couple of minor things, but overall, it was awesome. It worked great. It allowed me to, just like in GitHub, it allows you to see right inside of the PR what's actually failing. So if you imagine you're pushing up a change to origin, you go on GitHub or GitLab, you can see that kind of pipeline running, and then if passes or fails, you can see the results of that right from here. So you could go to the dashboard, but it's nice to kind of see right inside the PR, especially if you're a reviewer, you want to make sure, okay, this passed or failed. If it, if it failed, which one specifically failed, and you can look at the details right from inside here. And then Cypress also integrates with Slack, which is really cool. So you have everything that you need right there without having to actually go into the dashboard. It'll come to you through Slack notifications. The analytics is awesome. If you're a numbers nerd like I am, this is really great. I know it sounds like I'm selling something, but for real, this is like really helpful to understand kind of what's happening with tests, because when things break and you look at this, it gives you a lot of insight into actually what to fix, what to focus on, and so forth. Like total runs over time, and like, you can see here, I've got less failures here, a lot of failures here. You can look at, your failure rate. So over time, you can also see, I don't think I have a screenshot of this one here, but you can also see spec failure rate. So you can see, okay, over the last week, this particular spec has been a huge pain, not just for me, but for everybody else. And so you can go in and actually, fix that or focus on that particular spec. I know for me, sometimes like if something fails, I have no idea if that's just on my machine or if other people have been having that same thing. So this is really helpful to see. Run duration over time, that's kind of cool. You can see if you're slowing down. And then also specifically your slowest tests. Flaky Test, that's kind of cool. This is more than cool. This is actually probably the bread and butter of analytics. This is my favorite part, because tests are often flaky. And the way that Cypress works is you can actually do test retries. So if a test fails, you can have it retry one more time or two more times or however many times you want. But when it does retry, so without retries, normally you'd have to restart the whole pipeline, which is a pain, especially for that one little quirk or one thing that failed. It doesn't really often fail. Maybe it fails like, once a month or something, or maybe maybe like the whole, environment was down or something like that for a moment. So it'll retry that test. But if a test fails and then it runs again, and it passes, it's considered flaky. So even though it passed, it still gets a little flaky flag. So that way you can still keep an eye on it. And you still have that insight. So you can look at, okay, in the past, has this been kind of a flaky test? Because it looks like it's been passing just fine. And then, as you dig in deeper into it, you can see that it actually was kind of flaky. And then there's some good, fancy like KPIs, to show you overall, flakiness and severity, meaning like how often is this thing failing? Because is it kind of having to retry a lot or, a little? And this gives you some insight into that. I think that's a duplicate slide. I don't have time for that. I'm so sorry. Let's see. How about like a 5-minute demo? Want to do it? Do we have time? I'm getting a thumbs up, so I'm doing it. I'm doing it, guys. This is happening. I don't know why I'm doing this.
Might have to skip the Q&A.
Okay, that's fine. I'll be on chat. If you guys have questions while I'm demoing this, go ahead and ask them in here, and I'll answer them. So basically, I have this sort of blank thing going on, and blank. I just did npm init, right? So I've got my package JSON. I don't have anything in it, so I do npm install save dev and Cypress. I'm always a terrible typer when I'm actually live. I'm not usually this bad. All right.
I think everybody is.
Always turns out that way. So then this runs, and I've already added there's usually like a binary from Cypress that downloads. That takes a little bit, but I already got it. And here we are. So now that it's installed, we can do npx Cypress open. It's actually going a lot more smoothly than I anticipated, so might not even be 5 minutes. So, okay. All right. So where did that message go? Okay, so it didn't come up with that little message, but it'll say, or maybe it's behind this, but basically it says, you know, this is the first time you're running it. We notice you don't have any tests, so we're going to give you some example tests. And that's basically what we're seeing here. So when I click on this, that opens up the test runner. And that's right here. So here we go. And it just runs through these. And you can see it's kind of typing here on the right. And we've got our time kind of clocked right there. And it's telling us what's passing or failing. This runs, by the way, in a browser, like a totally different browser session. So it doesn't interfere with any of the other Chrome browsers that you have. It's kind of like an incognito mode. So you don't have to worry about like browser extensions or any of that stuff. And then we're done. So now I can go into this test. And as you can see, like before I showed you, it can actually hover on this and see right here on the right, you can see actually where everything is happening. So, and again, this, okay, so if I'm off the mouse, this is the live application on the right. If I'm hovering over, especially if I click on it, I can pin it. Now this is a DOM snapshot. So this is the specific point in time that I'm looking at here. So I can come off of this. This is the real, you know, application. Let's see. It's a good one. Yeah, this here shows exactly where it's clicking. Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to do is, oh, I see. I remember I did something fancy with DevTools before. And okay, we're back. So now we've got, okay, so this kind of shows what it does inside the console. So you can click on this and it actually gives you some details about what's actually happening. So we did this get action disabled element, which is highlighted right here. And it has the specific element there. Can I go on this and do reveal an elements panel? I can. And then, yeah, and then also if I wanted to, I could go up here. Let's just say I couldn't find that particular element. I can go up here and I can do like, let's just see, say I wanted to check that element, right? I could do action disabled, and then it finds it right here, highlights it for me, and then I can do copy to clipboard. And let's just say I went into VS Code in my spec, I can just do Command V and it does this sci.get that I need in that test. That's kind of helpful. I can also go the reverse way and I can actually click on like one of these, like this one, and it actually gives me the ID, and I can do in a similar way. I can do that. That's really helpful too. You can, pretty much do the same thing with DevTools as well, but this is just another kind of upgraded version of that. What else did I want to show you here? I think that's it. Let's see. There's a question here. Does anyone know if Cypress works with Svelte? Yes, it does. There are no Svelte specific plugins that I know of, but since it's JavaScript, it's front end, it will work just fine with Svelte. I know that for sure. I know it works well with React and Angular and Vue. Specifically those three, there are in the works, there is some support, limited, but it's it's getting there with component tests specifically for, so essentially APIs that are, React specific, but inside of Cypress, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Let's see, I do have a thank you slide. I wanted to kind of show you guys I guess maybe I'm out of time, but go to iheartjs.dev. That's really all it is. And subscribe to my newsletter if you want more details on like an update when I do the workshop and just new tips with Cypress. That's it.